Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lucy and today I'm filming a video that I think I filmed like a year or two ago and it basically just got a really great reception from you all. It's about podcasts, which is one of my favourite things to do when I'm on the commute to work or I'm just pottering around the house doing other things. I like to listen to podcasts. Basically, I like being able to multitask on things. And I'm one of those like productivity ninjas where I just like to be able to tick things off whilst doing other things. And that is where podcasts come in. Basically, I'm one of those people who can't focus without noise. So I work best when there's music, or if I'm in a busy coffee shop, or if there's a podcast going on. Love it, and that's when I work at my best. So if you wanted to know what my recommendations were last time round, I'm going to leave my first podcast video down in the description box. But this is kind of all the shows that I'm listening to at the minute and that I'm absolutely in love with. Now, there is a bit of a theme. Basically, quite a lot of these podcasts are very like millennial woman living in a city. I mean, I guess that's just because what I can relate to at the minute, but a lot of these podcasts are more about like kind of like self-helpy and more kind of like, you know, how to do something, which I really like. And I love a good life advice podcast, and 3 of the 5 of these are basically life advice podcasts. Anyway, enough rambling from me. Let's get going on my top 5 podcast recommendations. Number 1 is a brilliant podcast called How to Fail, and this is by Elizabeth Day. So Elizabeth is an author and a journalist, and a bloody great one at that. She is a brilliant woman. She has just released a book with Fourth Estate Publishers called How to Fail. And guess what? It's all about failure. It's all about how people said we should focus on the positives and, you know, keep in a good, happy mindset, and that's how you get things done, that's how you reflect on things. But Elizabeth is arguing that actually we should celebrate adversity. We should celebrate the times when we have failed and what that has led to. So How to Fail is basically like an interview with a special guest each episode. So Elizabeth has interviewed people like Pandora Sykes, Deborah Francis White, Lily Allen, and that episode was one of my favourites as well, David Baddiel, Tara Westover, Farrah Storr, basically loads of great people, and I adore this podcast. The episodes are quite short as well, like for a podcast, so they're about 40 minutes, which is usually like the length of one of my commutes, so it's ideal timing for when you're kind of like on the way to work. You start one, you usually finish it by the time you get there, and it just makes the whole time a lot more enjoyable. So I think if you're after something a little bit different and something that inspires you and makes you feel a lot more kind of like less of a failure, this podcast is for you. I just love how frank and, you know, relatable it is. Elizabeth herself talks about her own kind of failures, how she chose to go freelance and basically quit her job at a newspaper, how her marriage broke down and how she wanted to have children and that kind of didn't happen. And I think that's really kind of a lovely thing when someone just is so honest with their failures or what they consider their failures to be, and presents it in a podcast and also a book, which I haven't yet read but I am dying to read. So I would recommend this one for something a bit different, something really honest, relatable, just brilliant. Okay, number 2 is something a bit more kind of like how to, and that is the Nobody Panic podcast. So the Nobody Panic podcast is hosted by Stevie Martin and Tessa Coates. They used to work for a website called The Debrief and they used to host their podcast, but I think The Debrief has since kind of gone, sadly. It was a great website, and now they've started Nobody Panic, which is basically a kind of like guide for young women on how to do things. Sounds very vapid, but each episode is how to do something. Let me read out a few of my favourite podcast episodes. One of my favourites was How to Care Way Less About Life Milestones. Crucial, I think it's great. How to Be Sporty When You're Not Sporty. How to Spring Clean. How to Deal with Valentine's Day. How to Stop Losing Things. How to Deal with Workplace Politics. How to prioritise, and how to nap like a boss. So you can see the topics kind of cover some things that are really kind of important, like, you know, body positivity, your workplace, but then also things that are just quite like interesting to know, like how to sleep better, how to nap, how to go to the gym when you don't want to go to the gym. Things that we can all relate to, and they go from the kind of, you know, more deeper topics to the more mundane everyday things. That's what I like about it, how things are just very, very approachable, and also when you're listening to this, it's just those two hosts, so they rarely have guests on, and I think that makes it even more special because it makes you develop a relationship with Tessa and Stevie, and they're just so wonderful. I love this podcast so much, and I followed them from their debrief podcast days to obviously this one, and I'd really recommend it if you're interested in something that has quite short episodes that you could breeze through in like half an hour, but also on topics that are really important and also quite hilarious at the same time. So my next favourite podcast is quite a new one, but it is the Soul Sugar podcast by Carrie Rad. Carrie is one of my favourite YouTube content creators on YouTube, and she is just the most inspirational, lovely person. I would really love to meet her one day because she inspires me so much, and she also makes me feel like so calm. I don't know if you guys watch her, but does she make you feel like that too? Her videos are just all about self-care, all about loving yourself, and she is awesome. So the Soul Sugar podcast is all about kind of self-care, all about loving yourself, and it's basically her answering questions from her audience on different things. So let me read out a few of the episodes that have just aired, because it is a new podcast and it is one that already I know is one of my favourites. So some of the topics are failing at my journey with self-care, self-exploration for great sex, is it ever okay to ghost someone, the hard part of travelling as a couple, and ending an engagement and dealing with family judgment. So things that are quite like deep and personal, but like Carrie handles them with such kind of grace and care, and I really like how she is answering and helping other people's dilemmas and questions, but then she also uses her own experiences. So I would really recommend this if you are after a podcast that kind of looks at kind of deeper issues, but also is more about self-love, and it's just done by a lovely, lovely person. I just really want to meet Carrie. So yeah, it's a really lovely podcast. I'm already a big fan, and I know she's trying to make the podcast episodes a bit longer because previously they were only like 15 minutes. Like the first few episodes are very, very short, and I was like, I need more Carrie. This is not okay. So I think she's trying to make an effort to make them longer and stuff like that, which I think is wonderful because it is still a new podcast, and she's kind of taking lots of comments on board and really growing, and I love this podcast. Oh, and all of these will be linked down below, all these recommendations, so don't fret if you're like struggling to note them down. The next podcast I would recommend, the fourth podcast I'd recommend, is the BBC History Extra podcast. I think this was in my last video about podcast recommendations, but I've just rediscovered it again and I realised how much I love it. And if you're a fellow history nerd, or if you're just inquisitive and like listening to podcasts about something that's educational, something new, this is the one for you. It's the BBC History Extra podcast. It's hosted by the editor of BBC History magazine, Rob Attar, and it is brilliant. So basically, they cover a range of different topics on the podcast. Usually it'll be one interview with a historian or an author. Also, they seem to just be putting out episodes that are all of my like main historical interests. So I'm kind of loving it at the minute. A few of my favourite episodes have been The Women Killed by Jack the Ripper. This was fascinating, and this was an author of a history book that's just come out in the UK, looking at the lives of the women who were killed by Jack the Ripper rather than Jack the Ripper himself. And it's really, really fascinating because you realise how badly painted these women were and how everyone assumes they were prostitutes when most of them weren't, and little things like that, which was so fascinating to hear this kind of more realistic and female focused approach to history. So I loved that episode. I would recommend that. I also really, really enjoyed Love in Georgian Times. So this was a Valentine's Day special. It interviewed a historian called Sally Holloway on her new book about dating and courtship in Georgian times, so Jane Austen times essentially. Oh my god, that episode was so good, so interesting, and I'm a big Jane Austen fan, so of course Georgian history really fascinates me. So there's so many different topics, and it's not just British history. Obviously the two examples I used were British history, but you know, it goes into like feudal Japan and like you know, world wars, and it's not just kind of like old history, it's very like modern history as well. So there's something there for everyone. I would recommend it. If you're looking for something a bit more educational, I think this podcast is for you. Finally, I need to include a book podcast because that's what this channel is, of course. Gotta love those books. I've got to say, I don't listen to a lot of book-based podcasts. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I consume so much media about books. You know, I read book blogs, I watch YouTube videos, I work in book publishing, I run this channel. I don't know if I'm like oversaturated by book-based mediums, I don't know. But it might just be because I've not found some really great podcasts yet. So if you do have any book-based podcast recommendations for me, leave them down below in the comments. However, my fifth choice is Mostly Lit. This podcast is so good. I love it. Every time I listen to it, it makes me laugh. It's just really educational. It highlights a lot of important topics and it features a lot of great books. So this podcast is hosted by Alex Reeds and Raifa Rafiq, and also produced by Clarissa Paddy, who is a wonderful person. She is a genius. She works in publishing and I've known her for a few years now, and she produces the podcast. And basically it's all about recommendations, pop culture, and I think what I love most about it is it's so diverse and I get so many good recommendations from it. And also it's not just kind of boring book chat, and I know that seems a bit strange to highlight that, but I just want to emphasise how interesting their discussions are, how funny their conversations are. And basically, before you know it, an hour's gone by and you've spent a glorious hour listening to some good book chat. So some of my favourite episodes have been the latest one, all about a book called Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, which is a brand new release, and it's a #2 bestseller in the UK. It's huge in the UK market at the minute, and that was a really fascinating interview with Candice. And they do a lot of kind of live podcast episodes as well, and I think what's great about it is that they really recommend a wide-ranging selection of books and a really great diverse selection of books, and I love that. So top marks to Mostly Lit. So guys, those are my top 5 podcast recommendations for you all. Do let me know what your recommendations are down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a big thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and I will see you very soon. Bye.